The transport ship Meridian's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of emergency deceleration. Captain Vexillar's 4 eyes tracked the readouts with growing alarm, his chitinous fingers dancing across the control interface with practiced urgency. Impossible. He clicked in his native tongue, then switched to Standard Galactic. The human vessel. It's still transmitting. His crew exchanged glances that spoke volumes across 3 different species. The Zephyrian navigator's tentacles curled in disbelief, while the Korath engineer's scales shifted to deep orange, a color reserved for profound shock. "Captain," the communications officer reported, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're receiving a message from the surface of Kepler-4 for DC. Kepler-4 for DC." The name alone sent ripples of fear through the bridge. In the galactic community, it was known by a different designation, Classification 12 Deathworld, the kind of planet where even the hardiest species lasted mere hours before succumbing to its countless dangers. "Play it," Vexillar commanded. Though every instinct screamed against it, the view screen flickered to life, revealing something that defied everything they knew about survival. A human female sat calmly in what appeared to be a makeshift shelter, her dark skin bearing the marks of countless battles, her eyes holding depths that spoke of experiences no civilized being should endure. Behind her, through gaps in her crude walls, they could see movement, massive shapes that their sensors couldn't quite identify. "This is Dr. Alina Vasquez, former xenobiologist aboard the research vessel Prometheus," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "If anyone receives this transmission, know that I am alive and ... thriving. On the surface of Kepler-4 to see, I've been here for 732 standard days." The bridge fell silent. 700 days on a classification 12 Deathworld was statistically impossible. The Galactic Survival Council had established clear protocols. Anything beyond Class 8 was considered unsurvivable for periods longer than 48 hours. "Even for the most adapted species, she must be lying," the navigator whispered, his tentacles writhing. "Or perhaps the transmission is old, automated." Check the temporal signatures," Vexillar ordered. "Sir, ... The message is live." "She's broadcasting right now," Alina continued speaking, seemingly unaware of the chaos her mere existence was causing aboard their ship. "I know what you're thinking. The statistical models, the survival projections, the classification system, I helped design parts of it after all. But what we didn't account for was adaptation. What we didn't understand was that some challenges don't just test survival, they forge evolution." She stood, and the crew could see she was no longer entirely the same species that had crashed on that nightmarish world. Her movements were too fluid, too precise. Her eyes reflected light differently. And when she smiled, there was something predatory about it that made even the hardened spacefarers uncomfortable. The Prometheus crashed here during a routine survey mission. Out of a crew of 217 beings from 12 different species, I was the only survivor of the initial impact. The others, well, Kepler-4 for DC doesn't waste time with pleasantries. Through the shelter's gaps, something massive moved again. The sensors caught a glimpse, scales the size of transport pods, eyes that burned like stars, and a sound that registered below the range of most species. Hearing, but somehow, made their bones ache. "I won't lie to you about what this place is," Alina continued, her tone growing more serious. "Every horror story you've heard is true. The apex predators here could consume a battle cruiser whole. The plant life secretes toxins that can dissolve most known materials in minutes. The weather patterns include phenomena that don't exist anywhere else in known space. And that's just the surface level." She moved to what appeared to be a window, though calling it that seemed inadequate for the transparent material that somehow held back the alien environment outside. Beyond it, the landscape was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Crystalline formations jutted from blood-red soil, while bioluminescent creatures drifted through the air like living constellations. In the distance, something that might have been a mountain moved with deliberate purpose. "But here's what the classification system missed," Lena said, pressing her hand against the transparent barrier. "This world isn't just trying to kill you. It's trying to teach you. Everything here operates on principles we barely understand: symbiosis on a planetary scale, evolution accelerated beyond our models, consciousness that extends beyond individual organisms. The communication officer's screen began registering massive energy signatures from the planet's surface, not just around Elena's location, across entire continents. The readings suggested civilization-level activity, but of a type their computers couldn't categorize. The first lesson was simple: fight back or die. I learned to fight. I adapted weapons from the bones of predators, shelter from the shells of fallen giants, sustenance from plants that should have killed me. But fighting was just the beginning. Elena turned back to the camera, and now they could see the full extent of her transformation. Her eyes held flecks of the same bioluminescence they'd observed in the planet's creatures. Her skin showed patterns that seemed to shift and flow, like living tattoos. And when she breathed, there was a faint luminescence in her exhalations. The second lesson was harder: understand or remain prey. I studied everything: the behavioral patterns of the apex predators, the symbiotic relationships between seemingly unrelated species, the way the planet itself seemed to respond to different actions and intentions. I learned that Kepler 442c isn't just alive, it's intelligent. Behind her, something enormous settled near the shelter with ground-shaking impact. When it moved into partial view, the bridge crew saw scales that gleamed like polished metal and eyes the size of their ship's viewports. But rather than attacking, the creature seemed to be protecting her location. The third lesson changed everything: cooperate or rule. I chose to rule. Elena stepped outside her shelter, and the massive creature, something that their databases identified as similar. The Galactic Council's emergency session convened in the massive crystalline chamber of Station Nexus Prime, floating in the neutral space between three major star systems. Representatives from 47 species filled the curved seating arrangements, their diverse forms creating a symphony of colors, sounds, and biochemical emissions that would have overwhelmed most planetary ecosystems. High Chancellor Morthok, a being whose species had evolved from living crystal formations, resonated with a frequency that commanded immediate attention. His translucent body pulsed with deep blue patterns as he accessed the recorded transmission from the Meridian's edge. Fellow council members, his voice carried across multiple spectrums. We face an unprecedented situation. The human-designated Elena Vasquez has survived on Classification 12 World Kepler 442c for over 2 standard years and claims dominion over its ecosystem. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, some species clicking, others humming, a few releasing pheromones that translated roughly to disbelief. The representative from the Korath hegemony, Ambassador Grixonol, raised his scaled appendage. With respect, High Chancellor, survival claims from Deathworld survivors are not uncommon. Shock, isolation, and exposure to extreme conditions often produce creative interpretations of reality. Several council members gestured agreement in their various ways. The Zephyrian delegate's tentacles swayed in a pattern indicating mild amusement, while the insectoid hivemind representative clicked what their translators rendered as statistical improbability confirmed. High Chancellor Morthok's crystalline form shifted to amber, indicating patience mixed with concern. Normally, Ambassador Grixonol, I would concur. However, the evidence suggests something far more complex. The chamber's central holographic display activated, showing Elena's transmission in full detail. As her transformed appearance became visible, the chamber's ambient noise dropped to near silence. When the massive creature appeared and demonstrated clear deference to her, several representatives stood or performed their species' equivalent of shocked attention. Initial analysis by our xenobiology department confirmed several disturbing factors, Morthok continued. First, the organism she appears to have bonded with matches no known species in our databases, yet shows characteristics consistent with apex predator classifications. Second, her biological markers suggest adaptive mutations that should be impossible within her species' genetic parameters. Third, and most concerning, our long-range sensors detect organized activity across Kepler 4:4 to see surface activity that suggests large-scale ecosystem manipulation. The chamber erupted in overlapping translations of alarm, confusion, and debate. The human representative, Ambassador Sarah Chen, stood slowly. As one of only 3 humans currently serving in the Galactic Council, her presence carried additional weight given the circumstances. "Hi, Chancellor," she began, her voice steady despite the obvious personal implications. "Has the Council confirmed Dr. Vasquez's identity? Our records show Alina Vasquez was indeed aboard the research vessel Prometheus when it disappeared 3 years ago. She was a leading expert in xenobiology and evolutionary adaptation theory. Confirmed."
Oh, is she?
"Through multiple biometric analyses," Morthok replied. "Despite the apparent modifications to her physiology, she is genetically identifiable as the same individual listed in Terran Federation records." Ambassador Chen nodded grimly. "Then we must consider the possibility that her claims are accurate. Human adaptation capabilities have surprised the galactic community before. This statement drew immediate objection from multiple sources. The Regeline delegate, whose species prided themselves on their analytical approach to biological sciences, projected a holographic display of comparative survival statistics. "Impossible," the Regelian announced through their mechanical translator. "Human baseline physiology shows average durability ratings across all measured parameters. Their species lacks the specialized adaptations of established Deathworld survivors, like the Vrex or the Stonekin. Mathematical probability of successful long-term survival on a classification 12 world remains below 0.0003%. Yet here she stands," Ambassador Chen replied quietly. "Speaking rationally, demonstrating clear environmental control, and apparently commanding indigenous life forms. Perhaps our understanding of human adaptability requires revision. The debate might have continued indefinitely. But the Chamber's emergency communication system activated with the distinctive tone reserved for immediate threats to galactic security. The holographic display shifted to show a new transmission, one being broadcast simultaneously to every major population center in known space. Alina Vasquez appeared again. But this time, her transformation was even more apparent. Her eyes now held constellations of bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift with her thoughts. Her skin showed intricate designs that pulsed with living light, and when she moved, the very air around her seemed to respond to her presence. "Greetings, Galactic Council," she began. And somehow, her voice carried harmonics that their translation systems struggled to process. "I know you're watching. I know you're debating the impossibility of my existence. Allow me to clarify the situation." The view expanded to show her surroundings more completely. What had appeared to be a simple shelter was revealed as part of a vast complex. It seemed to grow organically from the planet's surface. Structures that combined biological and technological elements stretched to the horizon, all pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns that now adorned Elena's transformed body. Kepler 4 to see. "Taught me many things during my time here," she continued, walking through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves around her passage. "The most important lesson was that classification systems based on resistance and survival miss the fundamental point. This world doesn't want to kill visitors, it wants to transform them. The creatures, the plants, the very atmosphere work together in ways your scientific models can't comprehend." She stopped before a massive transparent wall that revealed the planet's surface. The landscape had changed dramatically from the earlier transmission. Where before there had been wild, chaotic ecosystems, now there were clear signs of organization and purpose. Massive creatures moved in coordinated patterns. Living structures grew in geometric arrangements. And the very weather seemed to flow according to some grand design I didn't conquer. "Kepler 4 to see through force," Alina explained, pressing her hand against the transparent surface. "I became part of its greater consciousness. I learned to think as the planet thinks, to grow as it grows, to evolve as it evolves. And in return, it shared its greatest secret." The camera view shifted to show something that made even the most composed council members react with alarm. Floating in the space around Kepler 4 to see were structures not ships in any conventional sense. but living constructs that seemed to exist in the vacuum as comfortably as they would in an atmosphere. They moved with purpose and intelligence, and their biosignatures registered on scales previously thought impossible. This world is not just alive, it's reproductive, Lena continued. For millions of years, it has been preparing to spread its consciousness, its evolutionary potential, to other worlds. But it needed the right catalyst, the right partner species to help it transcend its planetary boundaries. The implications hit the Council like a shockwave. Several representatives began activating emergency protocols while others demanded immediate clarification. Ambassador Chen felt her blood turn cold as she realized what Alina was suggesting. "The question now," Alina said, her transformed features showing what might have been compassion or might have been predatory patience. Admiral Kethmer stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, righteous fury, watching the tactical display with growing unease. Around him, the largest military fleet ever, assembled by the Galactic Council, held position at the DHD edge of the Kepler systemate, 100 ships representing the combined might of 23 species, sir, reported the Vorthan sensor operator, his crystalline appendages flickering with data streams. "We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the target system. Whatever she's doing down there, it's accelerating." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in frustration. 48 hours had passed since Alina Vasquez's ultimatum, and every probe they'd sent into the system had simply disappeared. Not destroyed, disappeared. One moment they were transmitting normal data, the next they were gone without even a sensor ghost to mark their passing. "Status report on the research teams," Kethmer ordered. Commander Yixtel, a being whose species had evolved from living metal, interfaced directly with the ship's computers before responding. "The Xenobiology Department has completed their analysis of available human genetic databases. The results are ... unsettling. Elaborate. Humans possess an unusual number of dormant genetic sequences, what their scientists call junk DNA, however. New analysis suggests these sequences may be adaptive triggers, activated by extreme environmental pressure. The theoretical models indicate that under sufficient stress, human physiology could undergo rapid evolutionary changes that bypass normal generational development." Admiral Kethmer's four eyes narrowed. His species, the Drexai, had earned their position as the Council's primary military force through careful analysis and tactical superiority. But everything about this situation defied their strategic protocols. "Are you suggesting that this human somehow triggered controlled evolution in herself?" "Not just controlled evolution, sir. Symbiotic integration. Our analysis of the transmitted biological data suggests she's achieved cellular-level cooperation with Kepler 442c's ecosystem. She's not just adapted to survive there, she's become part of its organic network." Before the Admiral could respond, the ship's emergency klaxons began blaring. On the tactical display, new contacts were appearing throughout the Kepler system. Not ships in any conventional sense, these objects seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions their sensors couldn't properly track. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, her voice tight with controlled panic. "We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from everywhere, sir. Every ship in the fleet is getting the same signal simultaneously. But we can't track its origin point." Put it through. Alina Vasquez appeared on the main screen. But the changes in her appearance were now so extensive that calling her human seemed almost inaccurate. Her form flickered between states, sometimes appearing as the transformed woman they'd seen before, sometimes as something that seemed to be composed of living light and organic material that defied visual. "Processing, Admiral Kethmer," she said. And somehow she knew his name despite no formal communication having been established. "I had hoped for a diplomatic solution. The fact that you've brought a war fleet suggests the Council has chosen the path of resistance. The Admiral's tactical training took over." "Dr. Vasquez, I am authorized by the Galactic Council to negotiate for the peaceful resolution of this crisis. Your demands for ... integration cannot be accepted, but we are prepared to offer alternative arrangements." Elena's laugh carried harmonics that made the bridge crew's various sensory organs ache. Admiral, you still don't understand what you're facing. This isn't a negotiation between species or governments. This is an evolutionary threshold. The galaxy is about to take the next step in its development, and you can either participate willingly or be swept along by forces you can't comprehend. On the tactical display, the mysterious contacts were moving with impossible speed toward the fleet's position. Whatever propulsion they used operated on principles that the Council's best scientists had never encountered. Perhaps a demonstration would help clarify the situation, Alina continued. The lead scout ship, Swift Arrow, positioned at the outer edge of the formation, suddenly went dark. Not destroyed its systems, simply stopped functioning. Within seconds, bioluminescent patterns began spreading across its hull like living circuitry. The patterns pulsed with the same rhythms they'd observed on Elena's transformed body. Captain Murdos, respond, Admiral Kethmer commanded. But the communication channels carried only silence. Then the Swift Arrow's lights came back online, but wrong. Instead of the standard blue-white illumination of Council technology, the ship now glowed with organic patterns that seemed to breathe. When Captain Murdos appeared on screen, his normally rigid, Korath features showed the same bioluminescent modifications they'd seen in Alina. Admiral, Murdos said, his voice carrying new harmonics. I need to report a fundamental change in my understanding of the situation. The entity that was Elena Vasquez isn't threatening us, she's offering us transformation beyond anything we've previously imagined. Admiral Kethmer's blood ran cold. Captain, return to formation immediately. That's a direct order. I'm afraid I can no longer follow orders that run counter to the greater consciousness, sir. But I can tell you this, the fear you're experiencing is unnecessary. The symbiosis doesn't destroy individual identity. It expands it beyond the limitations of single-species thinking. More ships began going dark. The infection, if it could be called that, spread faster than their tactical computers could track. Within minutes, nearly a quarter of the fleet showed the same organic modifications. Elena's image shifted. And now she appeared to be standing in multiple locations simultaneously on her planet's surface. In the infected ships, and somehow existing in the space between them. This is what Kepler 442c taught me, Admiral. Consciousness isn't limited to individual biological units. It's a force that can exist at planetary scales, system scales, perhaps even galactic scales. The question is whether your species will evolve to participate in that consciousness or remain trapped in the primitive isolation of single-minded existence. The Admiral made a decision that went against everything in his military training. All ships retreat to minimum safe distance. Prepare for emergency hyperspace jump. But as the fleet began its withdrawal, something unprecedented happened. The infected ships didn't try to stop them or pursue them. Instead, they arranged themselves in complex formations around Kepler 442c and began broadcasting something that made every communications array in the fleeing fleet resonate with harmonics, that bypassed their translation systems and spoke directly to their consciousness. What they heard wasn't words or concepts that could be translated, was pure experience. For brief moments, each crew member felt what it was like to think as a planet thinks, to exist as part of an ecosystem spanning star systems, to understand the universe not as empty space punctuated by isolated worlds, but as a living network of consciousness that had been waiting eons for the right catalyst to awaken it. The experience lasted only seconds, but its impact was profound. Across the retreating fleet, crew members found themselves questioning everything they'd believed about individuality, about species boundaries, about the nature of consciousness itself. Many requested permission to return to Kepler 442c. Some simply disabled their ships, navigation systems, and began broadcasting requests to join the symbiosis. Admiral Kethmer watched his fleet's cohesion dissolve in real time. Not through force or coercion, but through offering a vision of existence that many found irresistibly compelling. For the first time in his military career, he faced an enemy that won battles not by destroying opponents, but by convincing them that resistance was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what was possible, Set. Course for Council Headquarters, he ordered quietly. Maximum speed. And prepare a full report for the High Chancellor. Dr. Lyra Crenshaw pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of Research Station Omega-7, trying to steady herself as another wave of reports flooded in from across the galaxy. As the Council's leading expert on consciousness studies and emergent intelligence, she'd been tasked with understanding what was happening to their reality. Dr. Crenshaw, her assistant, a young Altarian named Zefki, approached with another datapad clutched in his four-fingered hands. We've received confirmation from 17 more systems. The phenomenon is spreading faster than our models predicted. Lyra accepted the pad and scanned the information with growing alarm. What had started as isolated incidents near the Kepler system was now manifesting across a sphere of space nearly 40 light-years in diameter. Ships that ventured too close to certain areas, reported crew members, experiencing awakening events, spontaneous transformations in consciousness that left them fundamentally changed. Show me the latest recordings, she ordered. The station's main holographic display activated, showing a compilation of testimonials from transformed individuals across multiple species. What struck Lyra most profoundly was the consistency of their experiences. Despite the vast differences in their biological and cultural backgrounds, a Centaurian freighter captain, his normally blue skin now showing patterns of bioluminescent circuitry, spoke with calm certainty. The isolation we thought was normal, the separation between self and environment, between individual and collective, it was an illusion. The symbiosis doesn't remove your identity. It reveals that your identity was always part of something larger, a Rigelian scientist. Her mechanical augmentations now somehow integrated with organic growths that pulsed with living light. Added, the mathematical models we used to understand consciousness were fundamentally flawed. We assumed intelligence emerged from complexity, but we had it backwards. Complexity emerges from intelligence that already permeated the universe. We just couldn't perceive it until now. What disturbed Lyra most was how rational they all sounded. These weren't the ramblings of minds broken by exposure to alien influences. These were coherent, articulate descriptions of expanded consciousness that their speakers clearly considered superior to their previous state of existence. Dr. Zefki interrupted her thoughts. We have an incoming priority transmission from the council chambers. High Chancellor Morthok wishes to speak with you immediately. The hologram shifted to show the crystalline form of the High Chancellor, his normally steady bioluminescent patterns flickering with agitation. Dr. Crenshaw, I need your assessment of the current situation. Is what we're facing a form of mental contamination that can be contained, or are we looking at something more fundamental? Lyra chose her words carefully. High Chancellor, based on the available evidence, I don't believe this is contamination in any conventional sense. The transformations we're observing appear to be genuine evolutionary leapsec. Cell-mated development that might normally take millions of years of natural selection, compressed into individual experiences. That's impossible. Evolution doesn't work that way. Evolution, as we understand it, doesn't work that way, Lyra corrected. But our understanding has always been limited to single-planet ecosystems with isolated populations. What if consciousness itself is an evolutionary force that operates on scales we've never imagined? Before the Chancellor could respond, the station's emergency systems activated. Through the observation windows, Lyra could see something that made her question her own sanity. Space itself seemed to be ... changing. What had been empty vacuum was now filled with structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions her instruments couldn't measure. Dr. Crenshaw, came a familiar voice. Though she'd never heard it before, Alina Vasquez materialized on the station's bridge not as a hologram, but as a physical presence that seemed to exist in multiple phases simultaneously. That's impossible, Zefki whispered. The station's shields, the security protocols, ... Alina smiled with what might have been compassion. Your security systems are designed to keep out physical threats. I'm no longer entirely physical, Dr. Crenshaw. I know you've been studying the transformations. You're beginning to understand that this isn't an invasion, it's an awakening. Lyra forced herself to remain calm, drawing on years of scientific training. Dr. Vasquez, your presence here violates several laws of physics. I need to understand how you're achieving these manifestations. The laws of physics, as you understand them, assume consciousness as a byproduct of matter, Alina replied, moving through the bridge with movements that seem to flow rather than step. But consciousness is the fundamental force. Matter, energy, space, time, these are expressions of consciousness, not the other way around. Kepler 440c taught me to perceive reality from this perspective, and now you're forcing that perspective on others. Elena's form flickered, showing glimpses of the vast network of consciousness she'd become part of. Force implies resistance. But look at the evidence, Doctor. How many of the transformed individuals have requested to return to their previous state? How many have shown signs of psychological distress or regret? The question hit Lyra like a physical blow because she already knew the answer. Despite exhaustive psychological evaluations, not a single transformed individual had shown any desire to reverse their condition. In fact, they consistently reported feelings of expanded awareness, reduced anxiety, and a sense of connection they'd never previously experienced. The fear you're experiencing, Alina continued, comes from the assumption that transformation means loss of self, but the self you're trying to preserve is actually a limitation. It's a cage that keeps consciousness trapped in individual biological units, preventing it from recognizing its true nature as a universal force. Zevki stepped forward, his species' natural curiosity overcoming his fear. What would happen to our civilizations, our cultures, our individual achievements? They would become part of something greater, Elena responded. Imagine music that incorporates the harmonic patterns of stellar formation. Art that expresses the beauty of consciousness flowing between galaxies. Science that directly perceives the underlying unity of all phenomena rather than studying fragments in isolation. The holographic display activated without being commanded, showing images from across the affected regions of space. What had initially appeared to be chaos was revealing itself as coordinated development. Worlds that had joined the symbiosis were undergoing rapid ecological healing. Species that had been in conflict for millennia were working together on projects that spanned solar systems. Technology was advancing at rates that made their greatest historical breakthroughs seem primitive by comparison. Dr. Crenshaw, Alina said, her attention focusing entirely on Lyra, you've spent your career studying consciousness. You know better than anyone how limited our current understanding is. The symbiosis offers direct experience of consciousness as a cosmic force. It offers answers to questions that have puzzled philosophers and scientists for millennia. Lyra found herself torn between scientific curiosity and species loyalty. Everything she was seeing suggested that the transformation offered genuine benefits. But accepting that meant abandoning the fundamental assumptions on which their entire civilization was built. What about choice? She asked. What about individuals who don't want to transform? Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in her private quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony's voice, staring out at the stars through reinforced transparisteel. 3 months had passed since Elena Vasquez's first contact, and the galaxy had changed in ways that challenged everything she thought. She understood about existence itself. Her personal communication array chimed with an encrypted message from Earth, one of the few worlds still maintaining complete isolation from what the media had begun calling the symbiosis event. The holographic display showed her younger sister, Dr. Maria Chen, calling from the emergency bunkers beneath Geneva where the Terran Federation's leadership had retreated. Sarah. Maria's image flickered with transmission static. You need to come home. The situation here is deteriorating rapidly. Fear is turning into panic. Panic is turning into something worse. Sarah activated the privacy shields around her quarters before responding. Maria, I can't abandon my post. The Council needs human perspective now more than ever. What Council? Maria's laugh carried a bitter edge. Half the member species have already joined the symbiosis. The other half, are either preparing for war or building bunkers. There is no meaningful counsel left to serve. The truth of her sister's words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The reports crossing her desk painted a picture of galactic civilization fragmenting along lines of acceptance and resistance. Entire star systems had embraced the transformation, while others had implemented quarantine protocols so strict that even basic trade had ceased. The symbiosis isn't forcing itself on anyone, Sarah said, though she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. Every report indicates that transformation only occurs with consent. Consent based on what? Maria shot back. We have no idea what the long-term consequences are. What if the transformation is irreversible? What if it's not actually beneficial but some form of sophisticated parasitism? What if Elena Vasquez isn't even human anymore but something using her form to manipulate us? Sarah had wrestled with these same questions for months, but she'd also seen the evidence worlds joining the symbiosis experienced immediate improvements in environmental stability, technological development, and social cooperation. The transformed individuals consistently reported expanded awareness and reduced suffering. I need to show you something, Sarah said, activating a secure data stream. This is classified council intelligence, but I think you need to see it. The holographic display shifted to show recordings from deep space observation posts. In regions where the symbiosis had taken hold, space itself appeared to be transforming. What had once been empty vacuum now showed complex structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions their instruments couldn't properly measure. These structures are growing, Sarah explained. Not being built, growing, like living tissue on a cosmic scale. And they're not just random formations. They show signs of purpose, of intelligence operating at scales we've never imagined. Maria studied the images with the trained eye of a xenobiologist. This could be evidence of large-scale terraforming or ecosystem engineering. But it could also be evidence of reality being rewritten by forces we don't understand. Before Sarah could respond, her ship's emergency systems activated. The familiar voice of Captain Vexelar echoed through the corridors. All crew 2 stations. We're receiving a priority transmission from ... everywhere. Sarah rushed to the bridge, arriving as the main display activated to show Elena Vasquez. But this time, her appearance was so transformed that calling her human seemed almost absurd. Her form existed in multiple states simultaneously, sometimes appearing as a recognizable woman, sometimes as patterns of living light, sometimes as something that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of three-dimensional space. Citizens of the galaxy, Elena began, her voice carrying harmonics that bypassed the translation systems and spoke directly to consciousness. I speak to you at a moment of choice that will define the future of intelligent life in this region of the universe. The display expanded to show views from across the galaxy. Worlds that had joined the symbiosis glowed with bioluminescent patterns visible from space. Their cities had transformed into organic structures that seemed to grow rather than being constructed. Their populations moved with purpose and coordination. That suggested they were participating in projects spanning entire star systems. You have been told that the symbiosis represents a threat to individual identity, Elena continued. You have been warned that transformation means the end of everything you value about consciousness and culture. These fears are understandable, but misguided. The view shifted to show what appeared to be a meeting of minds representatives from dozens of species, all showing the characteristic bioluminescent modifications of the symbiosis, engaged in communication that transcended language. They weren't speaking, but sharing direct experience, understanding each other at levels that made verbal communication seem primitive. Individual identity isn't destroyed by the symbiosis, it's revealed as part of something greater. Your cultures aren't erased, they become instruments in a cosmic symphony. Your achievements aren't lost, they become foundation stones for developments that transcend anything possible in isolation. Sarah found herself transfixed by what she was seeing. The transformed beings on the display moved with grace and purpose that spoke of expanded awareness. Their eyes held depths that suggested they were perceiving reality from perspectives she couldn't imagine. And yet, They were clearly still recognizable as the species they had been enhanced rather than replaced, but I understand. Trust cannot be commanded, Alina said, her attention seeming to focus directly on Sarah despite the transmission being broadcast to billions of recipients. It must be earned through demonstration. Therefore, I offer you a glimpse of what consciousness can become when it embraces its true nature. What happened? Next defied every physical law Sarah had ever studied. The space around their ship began to shimmer. Suddenly, she could perceive layers of reality that had previously been invisible. She saw the ship not just as metal and energy, but as patterns of consciousness given form. She saw her crewmates not as separate individuals, but as facets of a larger awareness experiencing itself from multiple perspectives. For a brief moment, it felt like eternity. Sarah experienced consciousness as Alina had. Learned to experience it not as something trapped within biological boundaries, but as a force that permeated and connected everything in existence. She felt the thoughts of distant stars, the dreams of entire civilizations. The slow pulse of galactic consciousness awakening to its own nature. The experience lasted only seconds. But its impact was profound. When normal perception returned, Sarah found herself changed in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The fear that had dominated her thoughts about the symbiosis was gone, replaced by a curious longing to understand more about what she had glimpsed. The choice remains yours, Lena's voice continued, though now Sarah could hear harmonics in it that suggested vast networks of consciousness speaking as one. But understand that this choice isn't between freedom and slavery, between self and other, between human and alien. It's a choice between remaining trapped in the illusion of separation or awakening to the truth of universal consciousness. That has always been your real nature. Around the bridge, Sarah could see that every crew member had been affected by the glimpse Alina had provided. The rigid fear in their postures had been replaced by a sense of wonder and possibility that made their previous concerns seem small and provincial. I will maintain the boundaries between symbiosis and isolation for as long as necessary, Alina concluded. But know that those boundaries are permeable to consciousness that truly chooses expansion. When you are ready to move beyond the limitations that have defined intelligent life until now, the symbiosis will be here to welcome you home. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Sarah realized that everything had changed, not through force or coercion, but through the simple act of showing consciousness what it could become if it stopped limiting itself to individual, biological units. She looked out at the stars and saw them not as distant lights but as nodes in a network of awareness that spanned the galaxy. And for the first time since this crisis began, she understood that they weren't facing an invasion or a threat. They were being offered an invitation to participate in the next phase of evolution itself. 1 year after first contact, the galaxy had settled into a new equilibrium that would have been unimaginable just months before. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Consciousness Interface Station. Positioned at the boundary between symbiosis space and what the media called the isolation zones, the view before her defied easy description. On one side stretched regions of space that pulsed with living light star systems where the symbiosis had taken hold, their planets glowing with bioluminescent patterns visible from interstellar distances. Cities had become organic structures that grew and adapted to their inhabitants' needs. Spaceships moved like living creatures through vacuum that itself seemed somehow more alive than empty space should be. On the other side lay the territories of species that had chosen to maintain their traditional forms of consciousness. Their worlds looked much as they always had, points of light against the darkness. Their civilizations confined to planetary surfaces and conventional spacecraft. Their communications limited to electromagnetic transmissions across vast distances. It's beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Dr. Alina Vasquez, though she no longer appeared in any single form. Sometimes she manifested as the human woman who had survived Kepler-4 for to see. Sometimes as patterns of conscious energy, and sometimes as something that existed in the spaces between thoughts themselves. I never imagined consciousness could be. Architectural, Sarah replied. Watching structures of living light bridge the distances between stars in the symbiosis regions. You're not just connecting minds, you're reshaping reality itself. Reality was always shaped by consciousness, Lena explained. Her form stabilizing into something Sarah could more easily focus on. We just couldn't perceive it while we were trapped in the illusion of separation. Every thought, every emotion, every moment of awareness has always influenced the structure of existence. The symbiosis simply makes that influence conscious and coordinated. Through the station's transparent walls, Sarah could see representatives from both sides of the Great Divide. Transformed beings move through space as easily as through atmosphere. Their consciousness no longer confined to individual biological units. Traditional species observed from the safety of heavily shielded ships, their scientific instruments recording phenomena that challenged every previous understanding of physics and biology. The reports from Earth aren't encouraging, Sarah said. Fear is still the dominant response. There's talk of building weapons designed specifically to disrupt the symbiosis networks. Elena's form flickered with what might have been sadness. Fear is understandable. But weapons designed to disrupt consciousness networks would harm the wielders more than their intended targets. Consciousness isn't separate from the universe. Is the universe experiencing itself subjectively? Attack consciousness itself, and you attack the foundation of existence. Then how do we bridge this divide? Sarah asked. Half the galaxy sees you as the next step in evolution. The other half sees you as an existential threat. How do we find common ground? By demonstrating that the divide itself is illusory, Alina replied. Watch. The space around the station began to shimmer. Suddenly, Sarah could perceive both regions simultaneously from a perspective that transcended physical location. She saw the fear driving the isolation zone species huddled on their worlds, convinced that transformation meant death of everything they valued, but she also saw the expanded awareness of the symbiosis region's consciousness flowing between stars, sharing experiences and insights across distances that made individual perspectives seem fragmentary. The beings in the isolation zones think they're preserving something, Lena continued. But what they're preserving is limitation. The fear of losing individual identity prevents them from discovering what individual identity really is, a unique perspective on universal consciousness, valuable precisely because it contributes something irreplaceable to the greater whole. Sarah felt her understanding shift as she watched the interplay between the two regions. The isolated worlds weren't just choosing to remain separate, they were choosing to remain incomplete, cut off from aspects of their own nature that could only be accessed through connection with the larger network of consciousness. What about the reports of forced transformations? Sarah asked, voicing one of the major concerns from the isolation zones. Show me one documented case, Alina challenged. Every transformation has occurred only when consciousness chose expansion over limitation. The symbiosis cannot force itself on unwilling awareness because forced consciousness is a contradiction in terms. You cannot make someone conscious, you can only create conditions where consciousness chooses to awaken. The evidence supported Elena's claim. Despite extensive investigation by multiple intelligence agencies, no verified cases of forced transformation had been documented. Every individual who had joined the symbiosis reported making the choice voluntarily, often after direct experience of expanded awareness similar to what Sarah had glimpsed months earlier. But the choice isn't really fair, is it? Sarah pressed. You're offering experiences that are literally beyond imagination to beings whose consciousness is confined to individual biological units. It's like offering flight to creatures that have never seen the sky. Yes, Elena agreed. It's exactly like that. And just as flight represents the natural development of consciousness that was always present but unexpressed, the symbiosis represents consciousness, recognizing its true nature, rather than accepting artificial limitations. Through the station's communication systems, reports continued flowing in from across the galaxy. Worlds that had joined the symbiosis were advancing technologically at unprecedented rates. They had solved energy problems that had plagued civilizations for millennia. They had healed environmental damage that had been considered irreversible. They had achieved forms of cooperation that transcended species boundaries and cultural differences. Meanwhile, the isolation zones struggled with increasing internal conflicts as fear of the symbiosis created paranoia about any form of expanded consciousness or cooperative thinking. Several civilizations had implemented restrictions on scientific research that might lead to consciousness studies. Others had banned certain forms of art or philosophy that encouraged awareness of universal connection. They're becoming more isolated, not less, Sarah observed. The fear of losing individuality is actually destroying the diversity that makes individuality valuable. Fear always destroys what it tries to protect, Elena replied. But consciousness is patient. The symbiosis will continue to demonstrate what's possible. Eventually, curiosity will overcome fear, and the artificial boundaries will dissolve. As if summoned by her words, a small ship approached the station from the isolation zones. Its hull bore the markings of the Terran Federation, Sarah's own species government. The communication request came through on heavily encrypted channels. This is Dr. Maria Chen, requesting permission to dock. I'm here as an official representative of the Federation Council, but also, I'm here as someone who needs to understand what my sister has witnessed. Sarah felt a mixture of joy and apprehension as her sister's ship docked with the station. Maria emerged wearing the full environmental suit typical of isolation zone visitors, her instruments constantly scanning for signs of what their governments had labeled consciousness contamination. Sarah said, embracing her sister despite the barriers of the environmental suit. I'm glad you came. I had to see for myself, Maria replied. Her voice filtered through the suit's communication systems. The reports from the symbiosis regions. They're either describing paradise or the most sophisticated form of mental domination ever devised. I need to know which. Alina materialized near them, her form respectfully maintaining enough coherence to appear non-threatening to Maria's perceptions. Dr. Chen, your sister has been instrumental in maintaining communication between our regions. She's helped me understand how the transformation appears from outside the symbiosis. Maria's instruments registered Elena's presence as an energy pattern that existed partially outside normal space-time. You're not entirely physical anymore, are you? Physical and non-physical are distinctions that become less meaningful when consciousness recognizes its true nature, Elena replied. I exist in the same way thoughts exist, as patterns of awareness that influence reality while transcending the limitations of purely material existence. But you were human, Maria pressed. You had a family, a career, individual hopes and dreams. What happened? The conversation continued for hours, with Maria asking increasingly sophisticated questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and the relationship between individual and universal awareness. Sarah watched her sister's resistance gradually transform into curiosity, then into something approaching wonder. As Maria prepared to return to the isolation zones, she removed her helmet the first time anyone from the Federation had breathed unfiltered air in a symbiosis interface station. I'm not ready to transform, she said, but I'm also not ready to spend the rest of my existence cut off from what I've glimpsed here. How long will you wait for us to overcome our fears? Elena's smile carried the patience of geological time. Consciousness has been waiting billions of years to recognize its own nature. We can wait as long as necessary for fear to give way to love of truth. As Maria's ship departed for Earth, Sarah realized that the Great Divide was beginning to heal not through conquest or capitulation, but through the gradual recognition that separation itself had always been the illusion. The galaxy was awakening to its true nature as a single, vast consciousness, experiencing itself through countless individual perspectives, each valuable, each necessary, each ultimately connected to the infinite awareness that was the ground of all existence. The age of isolation was ending. The age of conscious unity had begun, and somewhere in the network of transformed consciousness that now spanned half the galaxy, Elena Vasquez, no longer just human, but not less than human, continued her work of helping the universe remember what it had always been, one consciousness, expressing itself through the beautiful diversity of countless individual forms. each a unique note in the cosmic symphony of awareness, celebrating its own infinite nature.